Okay, welcome to another episode of I Hate Real Estate. It's good to see you, Kendall.
It's good to see you too.
So hello to our listeners and subscribers. Kendall and I have not recorded an episode here for a few weeks because he was doing attorney things at the beach.
Yeah.
And the other part is we moved, right? We're in a new studio.
We are. It's very nice.
Yes, welcome. We've been doing this while you were on vacation. We were working. I'm sorry, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But your gavel has arrived.
It has.
Yep. You can now
see if it works?
Sure. Okay. You guys get ready. Kendall's about to judge. Oh, wait, you can't. You're an attorney.
Not a judge, but I can bang a gavel with the best of them.
Yes, you sure can. So Kendall's going to help rule on some of the decisions we review here on the show, I Hate Real Estate. And I kind of want to talk for just a quick second about how I convinced you to do this, because you are not only an award-winning attorney, but you focus a lot of your effort on real estate clients, so you know what you're doing as well. So how did you get convinced to come on a podcast called I Hate Real Estate?
Well, as you know, I was skeptical at first.
You were.
I was. Because I do a lot of real estate work, real estate law, things like that. But at the same time, when I looked back at it, we've discussed this before as well. It's not necessarily that either one of us hate real estate. It's a convenient name. It rhymes, all those things for purposes of a podcast. But it's that there are things that go on in the real estate market that cause all kinds of issues for consumers, whether you're selling, whether you're buying. And I've seen enough things as an attorney, heard about enough things as an attorney, been involved in many of those things to where, without naming names, without using specifics, we want to expose some of those things for the issues that occur. And so that's why I agreed to come on.
Thank you. And so I just kind of want to make sure that he said it, not me. But also just wanted to say that same. So after working 17 years in that industry, basically most people come into real estate as a second career, or they do it as a second job that turns into a full career. And for me, it was weird because I'm straight out of high school into real estate appraisal. And the barriers to entry were very high because it was just a lot of things going on with being supervised and geographical competence and moving across the country in the middle of it. All those things I was observing, especially through 08 and 09, was watching some of the lending practices, the appraisal practices, and the practices of real estate agents and brokers. And I've seen a lot of things that I'm not super proud of in the industry, as well as things that are incredibly life-changing and moving. And so that being said, the name, as we've talked about, is trendy, and it's a way to get your attention. But the idea is that we can expose some of the things we've both seen and protect the consumer a little bit. And so also supporting those of you who are in the real estate profession. It's not, not all agents are created equal. Not all attorneys are created equal. And there are situations, without naming names and places, where you're going to hear some things that are kind of unsundry. But there's probably more good than bad, like there is in other industries. And we're going to break down CSI style.
And it's not always real estate agents. It's not always real estate professionals. It's not always brokers. There's
for
buyers
sale by
and
owners.
sellers. I mean, you have a lot of professional buyers and sellers out there too.
Yep.
And those buyers and sellers do things that they're wrongful.
Yeah.
There are third parties that get involved. There's inspectors, there's appraisers, there's lenders that are obviously involved in a large majority of the real estate transactions. So we're not just focusing, we never intended to focus just on what a real estate agent or a real estate professional may do. It's across the industry as a whole.
Right. And it basically give you a roadmap, kind of like CSI does when they break down a case. We're going to be breaking down these cases and seeing basically the main three questions. Who knew? When did they know about it? And then what did they do about it? Because that's really how you're going to approach it from a legal standpoint, right? So when a case crosses your desk, you're going to start asking those same questions. So before we get into how we're going to look at these cases, let's talk about kind of our professional situation where you're an attorney. Obviously, I'm a real estate agent, but I started out as an appraiser. And the barriers to entry are a little bit different on the appraisal side and the real estate side. So is the complaint process. So as a consumer, as an agent, or as a person, when someone comes to you with a complaint, they haven't always gone through that process first, right? Can you break down for me like what someone does when they come to you with like, John totally sold me this house, it's a lemon. Where do you start with complaint process?
Well, you got to answer that first question of who knew what.
Okay.
Who was involved. So one of the first things that we do is we assess who the party is that would have some responsibility or liability would be the word. And if that's a buyer or a seller, that's a completely different remedy than if the real estate agent or a real estate broker did something wrong.
Right.
And so really in my mind, there's three options that we look at. Let's assume first that you've got the real estate agent or the broker or the agency, something along those lines, is who did something wrong. You have the first option is there's no money recovery, there's none of that. If this person is a member of the Realtors Association, which I would assume a very large percentage of agents are. You can't actually
really do anything.
You can't even call yourself a realtor because that's a trademark term. We use it in day-to-day language, but a realtor is someone that's actually a member of the Arkansas Realtors Association
Nope.
or the National Realtors Association.
And note for consumers, keep an eye
Yes.
out for the trademarked realtor logo.
That's right. That's right. It is a trademark. So real estate agent, there's a board of ethics there within the Realtors Association, and there's specifically one in Arkansas, and there's many different things that can be brought in front of them, and there's a panel of other realtors that basically judge what this realtor or real estate agency did, and they can levy a lot of punishment. I've seen punishments that are monetary in nature against these people. The person that was wronged can't actually recover anything. It's just more of you want to make sure these people get punished. There's no licensure removal from the ethics. They can't lose their real estate license there.
So can they just impose? I wouldn't know because I've never been in trouble. But did they impose? They impose fines though, and they can do
impose
a
a monetary
suspension too,
fine,
right?
Or I don't think they can suspend
mess
a
with your
license.
license.
No, they can't do anything with licensure that I'm aware of. They can require more like CLE hours. I think I'm not sure what they're called on the real estate side. CE, which is the education hours, and
they require ethics training every year too. And that's
Correct.
the thing. I've been in them, but have been out now for a little over a year, and even my ethics training's up to date. But that being said, I don't know these breakdowns of how you handle a complaint. Like you said, you're going to start with ethics, but what if your consumer or your person comes to you as a client and they don't know the answer to the question? Who knows? You know what I'm saying? Like
that's what we have to look at. Documents. We have to look at communications, everything that
emails,
went on
everything.
during the transaction. Yeah.
When somebody hires you, does it just become everything that you need from them? You can just get from them. You subpoena it.
Depends.
This is the interesting.
Well, you're
part
on the
for me
third.
because-
You're on the third option already of whether
sorry.
or not we're filing a lawsuit, because within the ethics committee on the Realtor Association, there's no subpoenas, there's no formal discovery process like there is in a lawsuit.
So it does require cooperation then by the professional involved.
Right.
They would have to come and sit
Yes.
and listen. Okay.
And the third penalty that really is the harshest penalty is the penalty of removing them from the Realtors Association, because if they do that, they no longer have access to the forms, the trademarked forms that Arkansas uses. And Arkansas, we may have said it on this show before, is the model state for forms. We have some of the best forms for the realtors to use. Then at that point, it becomes expensive for them if they lose that licensing or that membership status, because they then have to have an attorney involved in almost every transaction they do. They can't draft contracts. They can't do anything that would be the unlicensed practice of law.
It takes quite a bit though for this kind of thing to happen, right? So I mean, that's another point I want to make. When someone comes to you, is a lot of times you're probably going to send them more through the barrier of public, like consumer path, go through this and file a complaint, more than let's file a lawsuit. I'm assuming, because lawsuit's going to be a more expensive option and it's going to take a lot more work.
That's right.
So
so if you're damaged, if you had, let's say that you had an issue where you had $2,000 in damages, and I'm sitting here telling you, hey, you're going to spend way more on an attorney or have way more risk to file a lawsuit, then you may as well. It's an unfortunate situation for you, but you're better off just to spend the $2,000 or eat the $2,000, move on, and not deal with this. But if you want to really make it a pain, you can file an ethics committee complaint. That's kind of where we end up if there's a real estate agent or a broker, an agency involved.
So what if you get this question answered and they're like, okay, well, we looked at the real estate agent and there's no way that they did anything wrong. They're definitely in the clear. They've been ethical, because most of us are. And, there's a few bad apples like you talk about, but they're pretty few and far between. So let's say that the seller is at fault. Like, I've got a perfect example of an upcoming client that's coming your way. In a situation where a seller sells the property and my buyer goes in and buys the property, and then you're post-closing. And let's say you find out that perhaps the seller advise the tenant prior to inspection to specifically dry out areas of the house and kind of take away some pretty substantial information from the buyer's perspective during inspection. When something like that happens and you find out later that the agent had no idea, that the seller did have an idea, the tenant's like, oh yeah, I'll tell you everything. Here's all in writing. At this point, how do you handle a seller or a buyer? Because they don't have any professional ramification. I can't go and be like, ethics committee, look at the seller. So what do I do there? Is that where the lawsuit just is? Do you have no choice?
It depends on your damages. The threshold question in any real estate case is, how much are you damaged? How much are you out?
Right.
Because it's never a cheap case to file, because attorneys just won't take those on a contingency fee. It's not going to be one of those.
Oh, we're going to get to money in just a
It's
second.
not going to be one of those, if we don't win your case, you don't owe us a dime situations.
Right.
However,
I just imagined you doing this commercial.
Yeah, no.
If we don't win your case.
But from a real estate contract standpoint, the contract itself says that if you prevail in any litigation that's initiated arising out of this contract, you're going to be reimbursed all of your attorney's fees and costs. So if you have a really good case, now that goes both ways too.
Right.
So there is always some risk there that if you were to lose, then you would be on the hook for paying the other side's attorney's fees and costs.
Which would be no fun. But it's kind of hard to imagine, when you're damaged to that point. And for me, I guess that comes back to a question of value. So we have these curable and incurable levels of repair, as you know, from previous business we've done together. And I literally sit there and think to myself, if it's not, if the value of the house or investment property has fallen 4 to 6 or 12%, whatever that damage is to that seller, is it worth that to go get it cured? Because you're going to have to actually get the repairs done. You still own the property. You've already closed. And then go back and deal with a seller who is being unsundry in that situation because you have no recourse without spending money. So how much value lost to the house? Now you're looking at a whole nother thing is let's get an appraisal. Let's figure out what it's worth, how much damage is involved, and was it worth my money to go to court and fight for it so I can recover that value to my home from that person. Yep. But what percentage of time did the seller actually pay the damages?
It depends on who the seller is.
So they have to be, every time you're shooting in the wind.
It's always a risk. You can't do asset discovery prior to getting a judgment against someone.
So you can't find out if somebody is able to even pay you for your judgment. Like, does that not come out in part of the thing when you're investigating?
In discovery, nope.
Okay.
You can't do it. You can't ask those questions. And you can research public records and determine if someone owns this property or that property or other assets, or if there's been any previous lawsuits against this person where some information may have been disclosed, but that's about all you can find out until you actually prevail.
That's wild. So from a consumer standpoint, usually they really need to go through as many of the free options as they can and look at every professional involved and go from there. So that kind of brings me back to barriers of entry. So tell me a little bit real quickly, though, because we didn't talk about this when I introduced you on the show. We didn't talk about attorneys and how you choose an attorney when you're in a situation. Obviously, I found the best and used the best. We had a mutual friend, and luckily, you know a lot about the ARA forms, clearly. You practice a lot of work. You've done a lot of work in the beginning on it. So break down a little bit of that for me and give me some of the information that a lot of consumers and agents may not even know about Arkansas's position as a model state, how that involves our forms, and how they were all kind of created, because I think you know a little bit about that.
Well, our forms were created so that lawyers didn't have to be involved in every transaction. Lawyers didn't have to be at the closing table of every transaction, and to protect real estate agents and, to an extent, buyers and sellers. The main issue I have with the forms right now is the mutual termination. There's not enough options for one party that is not satisfied with, like if you get a bad inspection, that's not satisfied with the condition of the property, you still have to have a mutual termination. Both parties have to sign off on a termination or it can lead to litigation. And in that standpoint, if you get some horrible thing on an inspection, you ought to be able to terminate by yourself. You shouldn't have to get the permission or an agreement from another party to do so. And that causes a lot of problems in the Arkansas legal system right now, because then you do have a situation where you're attempting to terminate a contract. You really don't have any damages, and now you've got to go incur legal fees and costs to do it. And so that's a problem. It's out there. It needs to be addressed at some point in the future, and it probably will. It'll come up. But the rest of the forms are great. I mean, it's a contract that you would use. It contains a lot of the standard terms that I would use if I was putting together a contract, and it's just check boxes. Yep. I mean, it's a go down the list, check the box, fill in the appropriate blank with the purchase price. All of the contingencies are covered, and there's multiple different types of contracts. There's contracts for an existing home. There's contracts for a new construction. There's a commercial contract. You've got all your separate addenda to...
It's a townhome addendum.
Yeah, there is a townhome addendum. But there's the ones where the delayed occupancy and early occupancy.
Don't tell people about those. Those don't exist. There's no such thing as delayed or early occupancy.
Delayed occupancy is common when people want like 3 extra days to move out of the house after closing.
You've got delayed
if they're doing if they're doing simultaneous closing. Early occupancy is where you can really run into a problem, because that's letting someone move into your property before closing. That's a whole different podcast that we can do.
We're not talking about that today, but hold on just 1 second while I make this note about next week. We'll talk about early and delayed occupancy.
Yeah. Everyone listening can imagine or watching can imagine letting someone move into the property under an early occupancy addendum and then they don't close.
Well, and it's funny to me because that's where it's like I know where the forms came from, and I know what hard work has gone into them, because you don't take a form from Arkansas and use it in a world-renowned law school to teach people a little bit about real estate unless they're great contracts that really, they do their job, and they make my former job, very easy. And so that being said, why don't you just tell people that they can't have an earlier delayed occupancy?
Yeah.
Why don't we just not write those ones and make our job real easy?
It's the same thing. A whole nother podcast on the non-refundable deposit and earnest money.
Oh, here we go.
But,
And I went earnest money.
The whole thing, yeah.
We should put earnest money on the table at the beginning of every show and then argue about whose it is.
Who gets it
Yeah, and then we'll see. Like, we'll just trade it back and forth and see who we can hold on to.
People who aren't realtors listening to this have no idea what we're talking about.
Okay, well, that's fine. So back to you consumers. The big thing is with the contracts, though, is we talked about how they protect a little bit the buyer and seller. Now, mutual termination, I agree, is a major issue because I just had an apartment complex situation where it was like the inspection got done and the buyer's like, I'm out. And I couldn't get the seller to sign the documents because he was like, I don't want to be done. I was like, well, you guys are over. It's over between you. And so that is a difficulty. However, with respect to a lot of the other situations I find myself in these commercial contracts, there's no shortage of protection for a buyer to be able to terminate with respect to the contingencies that you list in there. And the commercial contract has a space for literally environmental, the regular inspection, financing contingencies. And that's kind of beautiful because the state automatically protects the buyer, right, for at least the first 10 days. Tell me about that.
Yep. Well, you're talking about the 10-day protection?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
because the contingency there really is, I know you said, there's the mutual termination issue, but buyers are better protected in this state than a lot of other states, in my opinion.
Yes, they are. It's just because the way the forms are drafted. It's the way the contracts are drafted. It gives them more options. The option, like the inspection, the 10-day period for an inspection, there's a termite requirement. There's all kinds of clearance requirements in
and
there.
You consumers, listen up here because it is 10 full business days, right? And real estate agents, I feel like put this out there. I know I put it out to my buyers, but I think it's really important to note that because that really protects you to investigate and figure out whether or not you want to move forward with the purchase of this home. And 10 business days is a pretty ample period of time.
It's 2 total weeks.
Yeah. And it's people that can come out and estimate what might be wrong and how much is this repair going to cost and is it going to add enough value to the house that I want to move forward with the transaction. I think that's where a lot of consumers right now especially, they're out there running and gunning and making decisions on, okay, there's only 3 houses on the market. I've got to pick one or I'm going to have no place to live. I might have made a bunch of money on my house over here, but I'm under pressure to try and buy the next one. And I feel, and this is just my personal opinion, that's put a lot of pressure on this market and buyers are not aware that they have a lot more time in their bank than they think. And I just want to make, from my opinion, I don't think it's as well publicized as it could be that you have all that time.
Well,
and
the people that do know about it, it gets misconstrued as well because a lot of people want to apply it to other situations too. You
can terminate for any reason.
They execute a contract for any reason and they think, yeah, I've got 3 days or 10 days or whatever. People go buy a car and they're like, yeah, we'll just return it in 3 days if we don't like it. And that doesn't apply across the board. That's a real estate thing.
Well, so give me an example though. What happens if I have a 10-day contingency for inspection, but I want to terminate not for financing either, because that's how the contract's written. But let's say that my great aunt Martha passed away and I have to incur a lot of expenses to deal with that estate. If that happens and I'm involved in a contract, can I terminate I changed my mind, I'm moving out of state? Do I have to cite my reasoning or can I just terminate?
I mean, that depends on what kind of person you are. I mean, you can always say, I'm no longer satisfied with the condition of the property under that 10-day provision and say I'm terminating it.
I wish that there was another line in the real estate residential contract like there is in the commercial contract because there's a blank one that's like random contingency. If you could put random contingency in there because a lot of people are moving out of state.
You can in there's an other box.
Yeah,
I think it's paragraph 30 you could put.
Nobody ever,
but nobody
you know how many
does.
times I see people scroll past 30 because it's just like, so far
like a lot of the
contract.
real estate contracts that I separately draft have a feasibility period in it that just says you have up until the date of closing to terminate for any reason.
Yeah, I think there should be one that's
not
like,
in the
is this a reasonable
forms.
investment? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. If you had a financial situation come up though, it could impact your financing contingency that you could no longer have the cash to be able to put up to cover the additional 10 or 20% or whatever it was from your loan.
Well, and that kind of brings me to another point too, because I wanted to start with the basics about how you complain and should you complain and whether or not to incur attorney's fees. But really, this market has created a whole nother set of questions. And I don't know how. I mean, are you getting more complaints right now?
On the real estate side, no, not right now.
No. So everything's kind of just everyone's moving along.
It's because nobody's doing any contingency contracts. There's no disputes. Everything's all cash deals. Half of them are over asking, and we don't even want to look at the property beforehand. There's people waiving the inspection clause. That's crazy.
So this is the thing. I want to just say from an attorney's perspective that I'm glad that you from let me say it from an attorney's perspective, even though I'm not an attorney. What you just said was paramount to me, because people right now are acting a little bit crazy in this market. And I was talking to a friend of mine last night that has been in this industry for 8-9 years right here in Central Arkansas, so knows kind of who is selling property and what's going on where. She's like, it's out of control, Jamie. People are paying ridiculous prices. And also, appraisers are either, going with it or not. And it depends on their opinion and in the situation. And you can tell me this, because I don't really, I wasn't here before I moved here. And in California and in Las Vegas, I've seen extreme appreciation. That's how it happens. But in Arkansas, there's always been a very steady 1.5, 2, 2.5, like real steady climb, but not big jumps. And all of a sudden, we're seeing pretty big jumps. People are paying numbers they haven't paid before. And for me, I guess I get a little concerned about that, because eventually you're going to have to try and sell that house again. And you're going to need to capture that value. And how are you going to capture that value if you flipped it over twice during this market and someone paid an unreasonable price for it and the market won't yield that acceptance in 6 months to a year? So, is that a concern you have as well?
I don't.
Why?
Just from what I've looked at, I don't think it's going to drop.
But eventually, I'm not saying it's going to drop. I'm just saying
I'm saying that I don't think the values of the houses that are being bought now are being bought under the same conditions as what happened back from 2005 to 2010, where you had a lot of lending issues that were going on of people that couldn't afford mortgages. I don't think that you've got that situation right now. There's more money out there right now than there probably ever has been as far as cash and people's holdings and assets. So I don't think that the value of these properties is going to drop.
I don't think the value is going to drop. Well, I'm not saying that I think it's going to just boop. I just think that this market is new for Central Arkansas. That's what I'm saying.
Are people making crazy decisions? Yes.
Thank you.
I heard of
that
somebody.
was my question.
Heard of somebody who was moving down from Missouri that was moving into my town, Maumelle, and they made $100,000 over asking offer on a house that they'd never been into and waived an inspection review.
That is the dumbest thing ever.
Never been there. They signed a contract.
See, this is the kind of stuff right here that I want to start the show about, though, because that can ruin your life.
Yep.
That can ruin your life. I have a friend who
You walk into that house and you find out that there's been some leak for 10 years behind a wall and it's full of mold, then you're losing $250,000, $300,000 immediately in value to that house.
There's so many things that could be wrong with the foundation, the roof,
Foundation
the
problems.
electrical, the plumbing. There could be, somebody could have died and it could have been a huge stigma. There could have been, there's houses that have physical damage from situations like that too.
Those are the kind of things we talk about when that's the opportunity to complain, though. Is we did a show previously about an agent who didn't disclose knowledge of foundation issues of a property. Foundation issues are some of the most expensive things you can get into to fix your house.
And here's the other thing. If you're in the position where you have information about something, and this is something we say on literally every single show, if you for 1 second think, should I say it? Yes, you should say it. Because even if this information is not materially, they don't care at all. If you don't say something and a lawsuit results and Kendall comes knocking on your door during discovery, you're going to wish you had said, been overruled.
No.
Okay. Why does the judge?
On the door.
So what I wrote down is that basically you're going to hit your gavel whenever you've had enough of me. I could say
I didn't know that was a rule.
I don't know.
We're
making
going to use
rules.
the gavel a lot more.
Okay. We're going to make a lot more rules, though. There's one that I have what say the jury, so you can rule on things as well. And here's a good, perfect example. So for me, the barriers to entry, this is where I'm going to get a lot of hate right here, but the barriers to entry on the real estate professional side, okay, versus the appraisal side. We've had this conversation privately, but I'm going to go ahead and I feel like a lot of these complaint issues, a lot of these issues that arise is from a lack of knowledge sometimes on one side versus the other, because the consumer here is just trying to buy and sell a property. Okay. The real estate agent is trying to do their job. Yes, they want to protect the consumer, but they're trying to make a profit. The real estate broker is trying to make a profit off of the real estate agent's work. So they want them to do a good job too, but they're less involved, I think, than they appear to be. And I know from working in these positions. And then on the appraisal side, I just want to shout out to my appraisers out there. You can't make anyone happy. You cannot make everybody happy. The bank wants a number. The consumer wants a number. The seller wants a different number than the buyer wants. There's no way. So the appraiser is impartial, objective. They're by themselves. They shouldn't really be bothered with anything because they have intended use, intended user. They form their opinion. They back it up through a narrative and they send it over. So the barriers to entry on this side from experience it did cost me about $1,500, $1,800 to get licensed. I went through a couple of weekends, 60 hours of pre-licensing course, 18 hours post-licensing course. On the appraisal side, I had to put 2,500 hours of supervised execution after being issued a trainee license. So going through 155 hours of computer education versus the 60, about 3 times the amount. This 2-year course, I'm talking when you break down your appraisal log, how many minutes did you spend on the cost approach? How much time did you spend analyzing this land and looking at comparables? Did you use the sales comparison approach, the income approach, or the cost approach? What other approaches could you use? How did you write it? Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. It feels so much more involved. And then when I move out of one area, I have to go find a new supervisor, become geographically competent there, execute in a new market, and then I can get a license and I can start doing business for myself. And we wonder why this industry has a hard time growing, because those barriers to entry are so high. And it feels like, to me, and this is just my opinion, I want yours, these ones are a lot lower.
Absolutely true.
So when you're dealing with that situation and you have a lot less information, devil's advocate, doesn't it seem like there should be a little bit of a shift where maybe these come down and these come up a little bit, and we're dealing with a little more professionalism across the board?
That would be ideal.
That's my suggestion. Yeah. But I think, and this is why, because I think that that's more level of protection for consumers, right?
Yes.
As a real estate appraiser versus real estate broker, the responsibilities are the same.
Well, there's no doubt that there are real estate agents out there that have absolutely no clue what's going on.
No. They don't.
Have no clue.
I've been out of practice now for a few months where just my team is operating. And someone asked me to do a rent analysis recently on a commercial property. No.
There's people that look at it on the front end out there and go, hey, if I could sell one $200,000 house per month to somebody at 6%, then I'm going to make $12,000 on that transaction per month. I can make $144,000 a year. That sounds great. And they go into it and have no idea, no clue what's going on.
And the decisions that you make as an agent, a broker, and appraiser are affecting people's lives every single time. And that's the hard part that that gets me about it too, is I don't think that responsibility, that weight that's carried with that, it needs to be heavy on you, because that is somebody's decision. Now, we'll say, as far as Central Arkansas goes, it's kind of wild. Like we talked about with the forms too. We have an exemplary set of people. There are bad apples, but we have an exemplary set of people.
I get way more legal issues on the buyer and seller side than I do on an agent.
It's almost always somebody lying about something on the seller side, right?
Yeah, the vast majority are seller's disclosure issues, what the seller did or didn't disclose.
And almost always, in my opinion, from the ones I've watched, the real estate agent either doesn't know, or they've skirted the information enough around the agent that they're their friend or they're their cousin and they didn't tell them about XYZ. And then the friend cousin sells the house and then comes back later and finds out that they were lied to. And then it's like,
that's exactly what happens
every time. So, and you realtors need to be careful about who you accept as clients too. And you'll have appraisers be not willing to talk to people about things. And that's really why.
But I think one of the problems you're talking about here is where you get into a conflict of, I want to make money off of this transaction, which an agent is entitled to if they close a transaction. But that can't
be the main driver.
But the problem is the agent ought to be the one asking questions about a property. I mean, an agent will almost always go view a property before they list it. Yeah. If an agent see enough properties that they should know if there's something that's not quite right, and they should ask questions. And you get a lot of situations where the agent won't ask any questions because they don't want to find out. Because if they don't find out and they don't know, they protect themselves. And then if the person doesn't disclose it on a seller's disclosure form, the agent's free and clear, sale goes through, and the only person that ends up getting hurt is the person that buys the property.
And that's where the name I Hate Real Estate came from.
Exactly.
That is where it came from.
That's it.
These experiences I've had with you, moving out of real estate and into this production company has been very exciting. But on the journey, the expert testimony piece was the one that really made me infatuated, that I wanted to start this show about. And I know it's not the greatest name to get the attention on the industry for people who really love this place, this industry, because it sounds like we really do hate it. But it's the beauty of what we find through these solutions. When we went to court, those people were able, and this is in other things I've written for you too, the opportunity to provide information to a consumer in a situation where they are up against a wall, especially financially, and they're just trying to solve that problem, there's a huge satisfaction in being able to answer those questions. I know you feel that every time you're dealing with a client, and that's been my experience through the expert testimony piece. And I would just venture to say, if you are experienced in your field and you're ethical and you're good at what you do, you need to reach out and do expert testimony for the attorneys in your life, because there are very few of them, right? I mean, how many experts do you even deal with?
Well, there's very few of them, and there's even fewer good ones.
Yeah.
You're one of the good ones.
Thank you. You're one of the good attorneys. And that's hard to say because attorneys are hit or miss. I'm just kidding. But that being said, how we're going to break this down on our show is once a month we'll have a guest on the show and we'll talk to them about their particular experience, kind of how we had Marquise on that first episode, except for we're going to actually take the closed case, get that information, redact it, and then come on the show and break it down. Try to find out what did they know, who knew it, and how did it happen, and kind of give that CSI style episode once a month to our viewers. And then in these other 3 episodes, you and I will break down things like we have today with your barriers to entry. How much does it take to do this? How do you complain if you want to go through that process? We'll talk about appraisals. Next week, we'll talk about early and delayed occupancy, because now I'm really excited to talk about that.
The one thing we didn't discuss was the real estate commission complaint option. And I know
don't like this one.
Well, I know we're short on time as well.
No, we're not. We can sit here all day.
I want to bring it up because it is an option out there, and there is a recovery fund. The Real Estate Association is one of the few state agencies that actually have such a fund that you can recover from. It's up to $25,000 per incident. So there is this area where you can recover some funds where it may otherwise not be prudent to file a lawsuit because of the risk and the additional cost, and it's a lot cheaper to file a real estate commission complaint and to get a potential hearing on it. But for those listening out there, it is a time sensitive deal. You have to bring a real estate commission complaint within 3 years of the events occurring, period, whether you knew about it or not. So if you find out about it 2 years down the road, you only have a year. If you find out about it 2 years and 11 months down the road, you have 1 month to bring the complaint. So it's one of those things where there is no extension because you didn't know about it.
But if you file the real estate commission complaint, do you have to do anything with the ARA at the same time, or does the ARA have to get involved by way of association? Or
they're not involved.
Do they have their own separate complaint process too?
Yes.
So here's the thing about this. You can complain, if you need to the Arkansas Real Estate Commission, and that doesn't cost you anything, right? Or how much does it cost to file a complaint?
It's just, I don't know exactly what the filing fee is. It's a minimal filing fee. You would have some attorney's fee costs and drafting.
And then after, so then you could go to the ARA, file a complaint, go to the Little Rock Board. You could do that. You could just, depending on where the licensing agency is.
And sometimes we do those things strategically. Sometimes we'll say, okay, if we're going after an agent, let's first go to the ARA, see if we prevail on an ethics ruling, and if they're found to have violated some ethics rule, then we take that to the Real Estate Commission and say, hey, not only did this happen, but an ARA board, governing agency, has already found that they committed an ethics violation.
So then the other piece of this comes back to when you talk about the recovery fund. So those of you who don't know what that means, it basically means I file a lawsuit and I actually get paid by the recovery fund as opposed to the buyer or seller who might have wronged me, because that funds are available there to do that.
That's right.
When you go through that process, I guess the reason that I understand what it's like to get a real estate commission complaint. And if you're a real estate agent or broker and you've never had that happen to you, it will probably happen to you at some point if you are in the business for 15 years.
It may not even be legitimate, but it'll happen.
Because that's happened
Anybody
before.
can walk in the door and file a complaint.
And that was about to be what I was going to ask. You can go file a complaint for any reason at any time, but be aware that it is like kind of CSI. They're going to break it down, right? I mean, these people have been trained and placed into these positions to look at and analyze who did what and whether or not that there is a repercussion at hand. So what happens when somebody files a complaint? It's just ridiculous. Like, my real estate agent wore the ugliest shoes the other day. She's fired. That's
not going to go anywhere with the Real Estate Commission.
Right, they just read it and throw it out.
The Real Estate Commission will decide on the front end whether there's legitimacy to the complaint and you're entitled to a hearing, or they'll dismiss it.
Well, that's comforting for those of us out there, because there's some really great people on that board. And how do you, or on that commission, and how do you get involved with that too? I mean, from an attorney standpoint, you probably represent, well, actually, I know you represent agents and consumers and all these different people, and you're dealing with other attorneys in this market too. I mean, would you say as a whole that you and the attorneys all have a pretty good understanding about the way this all works and who's the players and how, you know what I mean? Is there kind of a...
Probably, yeah. The Real Estate Commission, the two that are out there, the Real Estate Commission and the Realtors Association Ethics Board, the Real Estate Commission actually has more formal rules about what's to occur. The Ethics Committee is the Wild West. You can say whatever you want to as a lawyer, a witness, and somebody may object, and the person that's presiding will look at them and go, this is not formal court. They're trained to decide what's important and what's not. And so it's, for a lawyer, it's fun to go do that.
I'm sure it is. And that's the thing about lawyering. So you really do see everything when it comes to real estate, and I've seen you represent
I've seen ridiculous complaints. There's one we can talk about at one point where, I think I've told you about this one before, where an agent got sued at the ethics committee for advertising a property with a photo looking off of Pettigene Mountain, because the back of the property looked off of the mountain, you can see for miles. And they said that the advertisement was false advertising because it was saying that he was selling all of that property that you could see off of the mountain out in the distance.
That's the most.
That's the kind of thing that
heard.
you get sometimes, and those get weeded out pretty quickly.
That's so ridiculous. I can't even imagine.
Because the listing even says it's like a half-acre property, and this picture is like 2,000 acres or something.
Well, that and like, just so everyone knows, you don't get the airspace. I mean, you do, but you don't get actually, you can't get the airspace off in the view as well either. The airspace is not yours. So that's kind of funny, but you also see some really serious things too. And I've noticed there's a lot of road work going on in our area. There's probably been some eminent domain discussions that we can have going forward. There's a lot of really, really interesting components to real estate that we can break down between Kendall's experience in law and my experience in real estate. Our listeners and subscribers are in for a treat as we move forward with I Hate Real Estate and investigate these things one at a time. So you're going to have to get your gavel ready. We're getting ready to sign off this episode of I Hate Real Estate. And he's like, I'm just glad you have that little wooden paddle and you're not hitting me with it. So if you would like to talk about a complaint or a situation that you have had in real estate and you would like to possibly come on the show and have that out with me and Kendall, we will break it down for you CSI style right here on I Hate Real Estate. So tune in next week for another episode. And until then, I'll be digging through paperwork. Just kidding. That's what you'll be doing.
Trying to find the next thing you can discuss.
Exactly. So while you're out doing that, I object.
Sustain.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's another episode of I Hate Real Estate. Thanks, Kendall. I'll see you next week.
See ya.